Welcome back to Laughing in the Dark, the podcast where I hang out in haunted places with comedians. I'm your host, Sara Jones. This is another installment in our Minisode series where I get to hear ghost stories from listeners. In this Minisode, I got to talk to Marc, an artist living in Massachusetts. Marc told me the details of strange happenings he has observed in the house across the street from where he lives. Here's the call.
Hello?
Hello, Marc?
Yes, hi, Sara.
Hi, yep, this is Sara. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Good deal. Well, thank you for being on the show. I'm excited.
So am I.
Yeah. Do you want to start by telling people your name and something about yourself, just for listeners?
Okay. My name is Marc Clamage. I'm old. I'm not that old, but and I live in a little town that's about halfway between Boston and Providence, in Massachusetts.
Okay.
And I'm an artist.
Oh, cool. What kind of art do you do?
To make a living, I do architectural illustration, but I'd much rather be painting.
Oh, very cool. That's awesome.
I wish I could make a living at it, but yeah.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? Well, so what kind of ghost story do you have for me today?
Well, it's a lot of hearsay.
Okay.
But basically, we moved into this house almost 30 years ago, and we have a neighbor next door who lost his house. It was seized by the bank during the Depression or whatever we're calling it these days.
Right.
And so the bank, I'm not quite sure the details, but they renovated a little bit and they moved, and it was a two-family house. It's I should have said that it's a two-family house.
It's like a duplex.
And the owner of the house lived on the side right across from our house, and then he rented out the other side. And so they sold the house and renovated it, and two new tenants moved in. And on the old owner's side, on the side near our house, it was a Dominican nurse. And one day there was some sort of religious ceremony going on in the backyard over at their house. And I swear it involved sacrificing a chicken, but my wife says no, they just were burning sage. So didn't quite know what was going on, but, neighbors. So anyway.
Wait, what made you think, what made you think that they were sacrificing a chicken?
Just because there was singing and she was Dominican, so I was going, voodoo. But
okay, yeah.
I'm probably wrong. Anyway, that fall, she moved out, and there was a moving truck in front of their house, and she came out after everything was packed up, and she talked to me and a friend of mine who's a neighbor who lives across the street, and she said, they should not rent this house. They should tear it down. And we said, why? And she said, the house is haunted. And then she proceeded to tell us about the two ghosts that lived on her side of the house. One of them was a naked elderly woman who lay in bed and screamed.
Oh.
And the other was an angry young man who stomped up and down the stairs.
Oh, my gosh.
And one day she walked into her son's bedroom, and there was the old lady standing at the foot of the bed staring at him.
Ew.
So at that point, that's when they decided to have the religious ceremony to cleanse the house of the ghosts. So she left, and more people came to look at the house. And I was chatting with. The house was eventually bought by a young man, and it was really bought by his parents, who bought it as an investment for him. So he was living on the haunted side and renting out the other side. Before they bought it, I was out in my backyard, and the father showed up, and we were chatting, and he said, "Is there anything we should know about this house?" And I didn't really want to say, "Well, it's haunted," because I didn't really want the bank to come after me, and I don't know what would happen if I bollocksed up their sale.
Yeah.
So instead, I looked at him very intently and said, "The last tenant moved out to the day that her lease was up. She moved out to the day." But they went ahead and bought the house, and then they were renovating it again. And that's when some odd things happened. One of them was, and again, this is all, stuff that I heard. I ran into the foreman of the work crew, and I said, "Have you noticed anything odd in the house?" He said, "Well, actually, I had my entire crew up in the attic the other day, and all of a sudden we could hear somebody stomping up and down the stairs. We went out to look, and there was nobody there."
Wow.
And then the other thing that happened was one night I was out on my back porch having a cigarette, and the lights were on in the house next door, and there was one truck in the driveway. And all of a sudden, the back door banged open. The guy came running out, leaped in his truck, and sped away, leaving all the lights on and the doors open. So, and I did not go over and turn off the lights or anything like that.
No. Yeah, fuck that.
So meanwhile, my other neighbor, my friend, started doing some research on the house. And what she found was that she found records going back to the 1940s. The house was older than that, but she found records going back to the 1940s. And between the 1940s and the late 1960s, a succession of people bought the house and lived in it for 6 or 7 years and then sold it and moved on. And in the late 1960s, somebody moved into the house, and they were there till about 1972. And then they sold the house, and the next person who owned the house stayed for a year and then sold the house. And the person after him lived there for 6 months and then sold the house. So something odd happened in the late 1960s when those people were there. And around that time, I ran into the daughter of the former owner, and I asked her if she had noticed anything odd there, and she said, "Oh yeah, the house is haunted." She said, "We always knew. Well, I always felt like somebody was watching me when I was stood on the back porch."
Oh. Wait, you always felt that when you sit on the back porch?
Well, no, that's what she said.
Oh, that's what she said.
I mean, I would go over and visit with them occasionally, but I never noticed anything. But anyway, she said that she felt like there was a presence there. So they finished refurbishing the house, and they moved in. And one day, the father was standing out on the street with his wife, and we were chatting. And he asked me about the house being haunted. The reason for that was because people were stopping off as they walked by and saying, "Is this the haunted house?" Oh, yeah. And so he knew something was going on. So I filled him in on this story, and his wife was kind of in the background listening in. And I said to him, "Did you ever notice anything odd? Did you ever hear any odd noises?" And he said, "Yeah, we used to hear like odd noises, but as part of renovating the house, there was an old furnace in the basement that wasn't being used. And actually, my neighbor had used a wood pellet stove to heat his house. So he wasn't using the furnace." He said, "We hauled the furnace away and the noises stopped." And I said, "Oh, that explains it." He said, "Oh, you mean there's something loose inside the furnace? And when we hauled away the furnace, we stopped hearing the noises." I said, "No, the furnace, that's where the bodies were. And when you hauled away the furnace, you hauled away the ghosts." Oh, what? And his wife kind of kind of said that in the background. The people who live there, when the strange things started to happen, apparently the wife worked for an orphanage in Boston, and there was just some strange stuff going on. And my guess is somebody got burnt to a crisp in their furnace in 1970, and the ghosts were still there. So that's kind of the story in a nutshell.
That is wild.
I generally don't believe in this stuff, but I'll tell you, that night when the guy came running out, obviously terrified out of his mind and drove away, that kind of clinched it for me.
Yeah. Was that one of the workers, or is that the son?
That was one of the workers. No, the son never noticed anything.
Oh.
The father never noticed anything. I talked to the tenant who had lived there when the original owner was there, and he had heard some odd things too, but never really thought of it. He heard stomping going up and down the stairs, but he figured that was going on the other side of the house. So
oh, yeah.
Didn't concern himself with it too much. But that's pretty much the story.
Wow. So how long have you lived across the street from this house?
I have lived 28 years.
Wow. And you don't still live there?
Years. I'm sorry?
You don't still live there?
Oh, no, we do still live there.
Oh, wow. So are you just staring at the house?
Here.
Are you staring at the house right now while you're telling me the story?
I could be, but it is a wall in the way.
Oh.
It's 10 feet away from our side of the house.
Yeah.
And so it's just a creepy little story.
Yeah. So did that completely stop after the furnace was gone? There's nothing else that's happened since then?
After the furnace was gone, nothing.
Wow.
It's all cleared out. So that's what I think.
Yeah.
Is that's where the bodies were. And when they hauled away the furnace, they hauled away the ghosts.
Wow. Well, that is wild. So
I'm sure that there's logical explanations for everything, but...
So you said you weren't much of a believer before, but are you still not really a believer? Is this like an isolated incident to you? I've seen things. Many years ago, I was at a seance. Oh, cool.
And we were all in a room, and we were all holding hands, and the woman who was running the seance said, "If there's anybody here, give us a sign." And she had said to us, "Whatever you do, don't stop holding hands, because then the seance will be over." She said, "If there's anybody here, give us a sign." The door slammed. Everybody let go of everybody else's hand, and that was the end of the seance. So,
whoa. When was that?
30 years ago.
Wow.
A long time ago.
Have you had any other paranormal experiences?
The only thing I can think of, and this seems kind of strange to me, is I was in Salem, and I was with my daughter, and we were in one of the stores, one of the witchcraft stores.
Yeah.
And there was a crystal on a thread, and you held it up over a base and it had yes, no, maybe some other things. And you were supposed to ask a question. And so the crystal was kind of swinging around, and I asked a question, and it immediately swung to yes, like it was straining in my finger to point it at yes.
Weird.
So that was pretty odd too. So maybe it was me. Maybe I'm a magnet for these things, but I don't think so.
Do you remember what you asked?
I asked if I was going to be a famous artist.
Oh.
And it said, yeah.
Well, that's a good sign.
Yeah. Well, time's a wasting.
Well, do you sell your art online?
I try to.
Do you have a website?
Can I absolutely do. I have to say, I paint what I see.
Uh-huh.
So the name of my website is ipaintwhatiSee.com.
Okay.
All one word.
All one word.
What I see.
.com.
Yep.
That's awesome.
.com.
Well, yeah, we'll definitely have to check that out.
Please do.
Yeah, we will.
All right.
Well, thank you so much for telling me your story.
Well, I hope you enjoyed it.
I did.
And if anything else scary happens to me, I'll let you know.
Okay, I can't wait. I'm so curious about what happened in that house, but it sounds like you got to the bottom of it.
I know. Well, no, we don't, because there was no unsolved murders around that time. There's no way to tell at this point except to find that furnace and cut it open and see what's in there. So, and that isn't going to happen.
Or something was evil attached to the furnace.
That could be.
Some kind of suffering.
They said they haven't been hearing any noises since then, so that was whatever it was. That's what it was.
That's wild. Okay, well, thank you so much. Have a great rest of your night.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Nice talking to you.
Nice talking to you.
I will listen to your podcast from now on.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Have a good one. Wow. I wonder what stories that furnace could tell. Be sure to check out Marc's artwork at ipaintwhatisee.com. I'm not just saying that, by the way. I checked out Marc's website and I absolutely love his paintings. He paints all kinds of things from portraits to landscapes, but my favorite paintings on his website are the skulls. When you go to his website and click the link to view the pictures, it scrolls along the bottom of the screen from left to right, not from top to bottom. So don't let that confuse you, but do check it out. I asked Marc for permission to share a picture of a skull painting on social media so you guys can see it on our Instagram. That's at LitDark Podcast, LITDARK Podcast. If you have a great ghost story, we want to hear from you. Email your stories to litdarkpodcast@gmail.com. Here's how it works. I like to hear your story for the first time while we're recording, so my manager will actually be the one reading your stories. She will select the stories that end up on the show. That way, by the time I'm hearing the stories, I am responding authentically to a story I'm hearing for the first time. It just works out better that way, don't you think? As always, thanks so much for listening.